curtains. Bands were used all over the place. Depending on exactly what you're talking about, they were used as head wraps, as braid bands on the back, as bun covers, on banners, on pouches, tent material. Tents were decorated and tied with tablet woven bands. Patches, wider bands were actually used as patch material. Sword suspensions, leashes. This one blew my mind, but there are extant finds of tablet woven leashes, reins, and stirrup straps. One of the earliest uses we see is actually them woven into cloth. And they were used not only as the header of the band to start a warp woven fabric weaving, but to also decorate patterns within the fabric itself. Size matters. This is one of the really interesting things. Everybody, we like our big, bold, sassy trim, right? This particular pattern a friend of mine wove, and she wove the exact same pattern starting at a really chunky 3/2 thread down to a 5/2, down to your number 10 cotton crochet. I will probably, if you ask any card weaver, we've used this cotton crochet thread for something. All the way down to this is a 20/2 silk. This is still about 2 times too big for most historical finds. Your actual historical bands very, very frequently are closer to a 60/2 silk, especially your ornate bands that we're looking at for your fancy garb. They were very, very tiny, very finely woven thread. For about the first 400 years of tablet weaving, bands were about 1.5 centimeters or less. From 250 to 600, then we got some beautiful finished Iron Age finds. We get all the way up to 8-centimeter bands. A lot of these were woven on those gorgeous finished shawls that have the metal coil work into them. They used a really, really wide band on the edge of the shawls. Decorative wise, we still see the really, really skinny bands. About 600 to 1200, we go back to seeing 2 centimeters or less. Because my particular baby has been brocade projects, I've done a lot more poking, a lot more research, a lot more compilation in that one. 44% of the bands are 1/2 inch or less. This is going from a little later period, 11th century. Over the 10% of bands that are over 2 inches are on clerical garments, almost exclusively. The one exception to that is Roger of Sicily's cloak has a band that is about 7 inches wide. It is fabulously obnoxious. For a size comparison,
so Anna asked, sorry, what is the thread equivalent to 60/20?
60/2 is the thread size. I get it from Redfish Dye Works. So it's 2 strands of number 60 silk. If you are in Europe, you a lot of times will see the notation backwards like that. But it is referring to the exact same size either way. That is, yeah. So if you're shopping for it, my favorite place is these guys. I get most of mine from Redfish Dye Works. You can order directly through them. I have some and I can show you. But that actually, I can grab that real quick, and if that's a helpful example, I got you.
Do you have a webcam on your laptop?
I think she's away from the laptop at the moment.
Yep.
I did. I'm upstairs in my office, so I have all of the okay, let me turn on. I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn on video. Okay. Hi. Here's me on a computer. Yay. All right. So here is your number 10 cotton crochet thread, right? Generic. Is that a good reference point? Has everyone used number 10? this is a number, so the white next to it here, yep, is an 18.3. That's a linen. Here is a 60/2. Let's see if we can get, what I can actually do too is tape some pictures later. So you're looking a third to a quarter of the size. Would you like a sewing thread all the way on the other side for reference? Yeah, oh, absolutely. I know I get it. This was a huge game changer for me to see how tiny that these bands actually were, how fine the threads were, especially if you're looking at the brocade bands, the more ornately patterned, you really get these tiny, tiny, tiny fine threads. Not always. Sometimes we do see a lot of thicker threads, but those are almost always the bands that were used to start a warp. They were thicker and sturdier, or they were maybe your beginning bands. Just like here, when we teach new tablet weavers, we usually teach them with something like your cotton crochet thread. From a teaching perspective, it would make sense to start your students with something that is easily accessible and is big enough to see differences in. Because I will tell you, when you are working with 60/2 silk, you can't see fiddly squat. Especially if you are trying to work in the daylight and only work in the daylight. It really is Fidelis. It's a, when you, about a year and a half ago, I set out to do a project completely historically accurate. And one of the things that meant was daylight. It is a whole different ball game when you are no longer working with that nice bright LED aught light that's shining over your shoulder. Yep. And I'm lucky, I don't need glasses. So having, if you did not have perfect vision, which that's a whole nother health conversation. I don't have the expertise for that, but how many people historically had 20/20 vision or had better vision? But when you are working with something that is, for example, this guy, and it's 34 cards of reeled silk, and that's on my thumb. That's 34 cards. And it's a solid color, and you're trying to pick out card number 7. In only natural daylight, in only clear weather. It's a whole different challenge from when you're working with your nice chunky number 10, where you can see it, you can use it. It's also more delicate. It frays easier, it stretches easier. It's going to change how you're working a little bit. Twist buildup becomes a whole different ballgame when you're trying to untwist something that's so tiny and so fragile versus something that's sturdier and stronger. What is really, really fascinating is this was not exclusive to silk. They were spinning this on a drop spindle. Threadvine. Thank you. That's my brocade baby. Yes, reeled silk is amazing to work with. It is your most period silk fiber. I have thoughts about whether or not it was used as warp for tablet weaving, because what makes reeled silk so unique is how little it's twisted. So you get an incredible amount of luster versus a spun silk. Like, that's still really pretty and lustrous, right? Yeah. Elsie, it's not my fault. Don't ask a question. So reeled silk basically glows. And I don't know that the light here is giving it much justice. But reeled silk on itself has so little twist in it. I'm obviously really hesitant to talk about fiber types, Fidelis, very. That this is pretty, but this is a whole different ballgame. However, tablet weaving creates twist. That's what makes it card weaving or makes it tablet weaving. So by the time you take this really, really delicate, really beautiful reeled silk and you twist it, you basically create a spun silk band. And after brocading it and after tablet weaving it, there is visually very, very, very little difference. One of my I'm an insane masochist projects, though, is to take reeled silk and see about brocading with it, because we do have brocaded bands where silk is on the top of the band. And that
Sorry,
would
I just
show
learned
up.
for the class. What's the difference between what is reeled silk as opposed to spun silk?
So reeled is literally not spun. In period, this was your really, 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 really long threads that came off of the cocoon. The cocoons were not clipped, so these were boiled and unspun and reeled on giant reels. Spun silk historically was your waste. It was all of the little tiny bits that fell down on the ground, and you spun them, and you had to spin them really, really tight with a lot of twist for them to hold together. Whereas reeled silk, you can, I don't know that I can show you this really good on camera. I can try, but I will absolutely take photos of this later. So reeled silk, you can kind of see will pop apart because there's so little twist in it. You can see it flatten out. My computer's like, I am not focusing on that. You can kind of see the separation happening. It's going to pull apart. It's not spun together hardly at all. It's got very, very, very little twist. So you can kind of see how it's fraying right there. That's not how the silk you're usually spinning or tablet weaving works, right? If you push it together, you don't get all this pop out. It creates an incredible luster because the twist doesn't break up the light. So you get a long sheen of light going down the band. Versus silk that is spun, you get a different kind of light hitting it. But when I push it back together, it doesn't see how it's staying nice and tight. I can straighten it right back out. It stays twisted. And that breaks up the shimmer a little bit on it. And if you look at them on just like laying next to each other on the ground, they're exquisite. It really is a neat difference. And it was another one of those moments of taking your historical project to a whole new level. It is a pain in the ass to work with. Because it is not spun, it frays if you look at it wrong. It will splinter and break and peel and snag and catch. It is like working with very, very loosely spun wool. It squeaks in your hand. However, it is absolutely gorgeous and beautifully period and makes phenomenal projects. Just have a glass of wine handy and maybe somewhere safe to yell a whole lot. So it does. You're right. I drool over it. I absolutely adore silk. I keep having people ask if I don't weave with other stuff more, but once you go silk, it's really hard to go back to other things because you just want to pet it. Okay. Yay! All right, detour. So silk. Silk is fantastic, right? So this was my example of size. When you're looking at a finished band for your garb, we all like our big chunky trim. We like our through 3 inches. However, historically, this is what you're looking for. This size and smaller, 1 to 2 centimeters of band along your neck, along your cuffs, along your collar. That's really where your size would have been. We did see a lot of fashion change in materials, in color, as well as in the technique that was used. Earliest, we see predominantly wool, and there's 2 trains of thought about that. Wool is more durable. It lasts longer. Were they using linen? It's possible. I can't tell you that for sure. And I don't know. We do know they used what we have extant is predominantly wool. We do see a good bit of natural colored wool used together, like a dark sheep and a light sheep spun separately. So you have a dark wool and a light wool, but they're from the same sheep. They're not dyed. They're used that way. There are some very, very rare silk and linen finds Most of the bands were very, very tiny. They were frequently used as header bands on a warp weighted loom. And so they had very simple patterns like diagonals or stripes. When you are in the process of setting up a warp weighted loom to run on cards, you're not also going to want to manage the cards themselves more than you have to. Speaking of, does everybody understand how that works? I'm going to figure out how to open chat again. Elsie, I might need help reading comments. If there are comments.
Let's see. You should be able to click on chat.
There it is. I found it. It was hiding. Okay. Yay. I'm sorry. I had every intention of having chat up on this side and technology. So some yes, some no. Okay. Okay. So a warp weighted, I'm going to stop sharing again for a second. All right. Regular card woven band. You're going to have to do. Your cards twist around each other. I promise I'll show you pictures. All right, this is my very scientific card we've been drawing, you guys. Your warp are these long lines here, and your weft goes back and forth through them, right? This is how we all weave. Got it? When you are setting up for fabric to set up on a warp weighted loom, now this is specifically a header band for fabric or for fringe, which is the exact same thing. This is how your band is woven in. So your weft becomes, instead of one thread going back and forth through the weft, it is a multitude of threads, and each one goes up and down, and these long strands are what afterwards would become your cloth. And this is what you would actually sew to the top of a warp weighted loom, and that creates your steady anchor point, and then you would weave these on the loom. And so when you were done, you would end up with fabric that had a tablet woven edge at the top. These were frequently very, very narrow, 2 or 3 cards, not very much at all. And they were very simple, even when they were wider, because this is when you're also managing this, you need those to be able to pack tight. You need to be able to, you're handling this weft each time, feeding that back and forth through. You're going to get really simple patterns. Rose, my hack for ram's horn type patterns, I believe I have a picture of this I can link to you later. I warp weight those cards off the back of my loom. If you take them and take just those forward facing cards, run them onto a bobbin, and just hang that bobbin off the back of your loom, you can then use that and just keep going forward on those 2 cards, because the rest of the pattern is twist neutral. I use a really similar version of it for a laurel's leaf type trim that I make a good bit. Yeah. If you send me a message on Facebook, I can happily send you a photo of it. It was something that happened impromptu in a meeting one time, and it works fantastic. I use those soft bobbins that Kumihimo users like, that you just pop and weight them with well, anything. A lot of times I just use large bolts and nuts and tie them on there, and they just weight that off the back, and as you advance the warp, you untie those. Probably. Anything like a bobbin is just a bobbin. It holds string. Thank you, Zeta. I love that I'm speaking to people who understand illicit language that breaks. So I appreciate that. Yay! They're so cool. Those are like the best useful bobbins. I have a lot of them now because they're super useful for stuff. Do highly recommend. Okay. Yay! All right, swapping back. Screen sharing. So that's why we're seeing very simple patterns for there. About 200 CE, 200 current century, we start seeing horsehair getting used in bands, badger hair getting used in bands. Most of the time it's used as the weft, your internal weft on a decorative band, but there are a few examples where the horsehair was actually used as the warp along with a wool or a linen band.
How is badger hair used as a weft? Isn't it short?
Spun. Cotton is short technically. Some wool is very short, but it was spun and actually used in the weft.
Oh, like thread, not individual hairs. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But I guess if you happen to have an abundance of badger, I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm the only person that's ever come up with a really interesting use for a random household item because it's what I had. I think that's a Scadian thing. We've all done ridiculous things with, well, you know, how can we make this work?
So was the horsehair also spun? I
Some
assumed it was
yes,
just
some yes, some no. Some of it we have more answers on than others because weirdly enough, they don't want to cut bands apart to tell you what they look like inside. I can't, you know, fault that, but we can do token protest. That my shocked face was going on over here. I know you can't see it because I'm screen sharing, but it was there, totally, promise. We see all kinds of patterning being used in this early period. We see twist, we see stripes. About 400 CE, we start seeing sumac, and that's where the threads are just twisted around a section of the band. And they go, instead of going all the way across like a weft thread, they're wrapped around a little section on the back. So for example, if you're brocading over 3 threads, in sumac, you're only wrapping around those 3 threads each time, from the top all the way through the back, round to the top, just those 3. Whereas brocade, you would go in, up over your 3, down, and all the way across the rest of the band. We do see brocade pop up shortly after that, maybe a logical progression from sumac. About 600, we start seeing silk appear. We've got linen and wool. We see those idling patterns. We see the 4 colors used in a single band. 3-1 twill, double face, and brocade. This particular time period is a rich list of finds that are not brocade, but are very complex, very beautiful designs. Starting about 900, we see the Viking brocades. We see the burqa, we see Finland, Denmark, England, Russia. Lots of silver and gilt silver. Towards the end of it, we start seeing gold. Early on, it's primarily silver and gilt silver, usually over silk. About 1050, we see mist hole making its appearance. Twist patterning, brocade, double face, diagonal patterns, they're all being used. Silk and wool has come back predominantly. We don't see very many wool finds for the time period before that, and they start seeing it a lot again. Generally dyed at this point, reds, yellows, and blues, lots of them. About 1250, we go predominantly to brocade. We don't have a whole lot of other extant bands at that point. Initially about half gold, but then around 1300s, we started seeing silver and gilt silver, as well as the colored silk used over it. Does it make a difference? I'm a picture person for proof. One of the things I see a lot of is a lot of patterns that were brocaded or were done in one style are recreated in other styles because it's easier, or we think it's easier. So Sylvia Aisling is a phenomenal resource. If you're not familiar with her work, please look her up on the internet. Her website's amazing. She did this comparison piece of what this particular band would look like woven in a twill style or brocaded. And this is the exact same warp. This is the exact same pattern. She did not change anything except towards the end of the band. She's like, well, I'm going to show what it would actually look like historically. It makes a huge impact. Visually, you know the difference between a metal and a fabric if you see it. You recognize that. And it's not something that the camera always captures as well, because the camera doesn't actually capture the reflective qualities of the light and of the gold. If you are trying to polish your persona and you really, really love those double dragons that are one of the more, we see that pattern a lot in the historic group, that's a brocade pattern. It gets woven as twill a lot, but if you want to find a way to pump your glamour factor or increase your accuracy, look into brocades. Look into what your original find was actually created as. This particular band in the corner is one of the ones that was double material. This is Ilsenhof. The pattern is really simple, but the green is a wool and the yellow is a linen. They catch the light differently. They were a little bit of a pain in the butt to work with like that. But this one I wove on an ankle loom. I didn't have to have special tools for it. It was very doable. It texture-wise, if you run your hands across it or you look at it, the wool is wool. It kind of soaks up the light and it's matte. Whereas linen has a little bit of reflective quality, not quite to the degree of silk, but more than wool. And so it has a little bit of a shine in the yellow areas because of that. If you want to go crazy, about 1370, there is a manuscript called the Code Paul Germ 551, and it is our first written charts of tablet weaving, and it is brocaded patterns. That is what this particular band is from. That's the same one I was showing you earlier on the reeled silk. It is a wealth of patterns. If you're looking into that time period, it gives you a lot of really great brocade examples, including brocade with peacock feathers. They were feathers sticking out the top of tablet woven bands. Q&A, yay. So up and coming, this is what I was talking about. This project was started off and kept growing and kept growing and kept growing. And it's going to keep growing because now I'm interested. So there will be a lot more to come of this. I am absolutely happy to chatter about this anytime. If you look up Illisif on Facebook, you can find me. If you look up Libby Cripps, I will put it here. And yes, this will be recorded. If you'd like bibliography, if you would like more on any absolute fun, I'm always happy to chatter about tablet weaving. I'm easy to find on Facebook. Is probably the easiest way to message me. And thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being patient with a late start and the squirrel down the silk rabbit hole.
Is there interest in a breakout room?
Yes, please.
Car says yes, so.
Yeah, you can kick me in one and I can sit up for a while and chat. I'm going to start munching because it's like 8 o'clock my time. So I love you all. I am happy to hang out and chat.